The wind howled across the barren stretch of prairie like a wounded beast. Dust swirled over wagon tracks already going cold. In the far distance, the silhouettes of a slow-moving wagon train vanished into the haze, leaving behind nothing but crushed grass, broken hopes, and the body of a young woman lying face down in the dirt. Clara Whitmore stirred. Her fingers twitched, scraping across the dry earth. Blood was crusted on her temple where the bandit's rifle had clipped her. Her ribs ached with every breath, and one ankle was twisted, badly throbbing from when she'd fallen from the wagon in the chaos. She lifted her head and winced at the stabbing pain in her side. The world tilted, blurry and cracked. They'd left her. They'd really left her. She had heard them arguing as darkness closed in after the ambush. The bandits had stolen 2 wagons and wounded 3 men. The trail captain, her fiancé among them, had decided the group had to keep moving, too dangerous to linger. "She's not going to make it," they'd said. "She's just a burden now." Clara's strong, but not that strong. Her fiancé, Thomas, had stood silent. And then they were gone. Alone. The sun rose higher, blistering her exposed skin. The prairie held no mercy for the forgotten. Coyotes would find her before another wagon did. Maybe buzzards. Clara clenched her jaw, dragged herself beneath a scrawny mesquite, and curled up, trying to steady her heartbeat. Her water flask was gone. Her bonnet, too. All she had left was a torn sleeve, a twisted ankle, and the sharp, bitter taste of betrayal in her mouth. She dozed off, feverish, dreams folding over memory like a quilt. She was 6 again, watching her father cough blood onto a handkerchief. Then 13, burying her mother outside of Wichita in frozen ground. She'd thought Thomas was a chance at stability, safety. He'd whispered of building a homestead in California, promised her soft nights and hard work, and she'd believed him. She'd followed him west, believing this journey was her new beginning. Now it was her end. But fate, it seemed, hadn't finished with Clara yet. Somewhere in the late afternoon, the crunch of hoofbeats drew near, soft, cautious, deliberate. Not like the loud, clattering march of settlers or soldiers. This was something else. Clara's eyes cracked open, barely able to lift her head. A horse stood 10 yards away, watching. Atop it was a man, lean, bronze-skinned, his long black hair tied with leather cords, an eagle feather trailing behind him in the breeze. His eyes, dark as obsidian, fixed on her, unblinking. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Her heart pounded. Fear surged, but there was no strength left in her to run or scream. She closed her eyes and waited for the worst. Instead, she heard the soft thump of boots on earth. The stranger knelt beside her. Warm fingers brushed her wrist. She didn't fight it. He was checking her pulse. Clara blinked again. This close, she could see the faded red beads woven into the band across his forehead, the worn leather vest he wore, and the kindness hidden behind his intense stare. He said something she couldn't understand a word in Apache. Maybe, but his tone was gentle, reassuring. Then he did something that startled her. He offered her water. Lifting a buffalo hide canteen, he helped her drink. She coughed, sputtered, then drank more. Her dry throat burned, but she kept sipping, eyes never leaving his face. Who was he? Why was he helping her? He motioned with his hands, pointing to her leg, then toward the horizon, as if to say, "I can take you somewhere safe." She didn't answer. Couldn't. But when he gently slid one arm beneath her shoulders and the other behind her knees, Clara didn't resist. She felt herself lifted into the air, cradled like she weighed nothing. The last thing she saw before sleep dragged her under was his horse stepping forward, steady and sure, and the sun beginning to set in the west. That night, while the prairie wind whispered its secrets across the grasslands, an Apache scout named Taza rode beneath the stars, carrying an injured settler woman across lands soaked in mistrust and history. He didn't know why he had stopped, Why he had risked everything to touch her hand, to offer her water, to lift her into his world. But something had flickered in her eyes' pain. Yes, but something else too. Fire, defiance, a refusal to die. Quietly Dot and Taza knew something the settlers who abandoned her did not. This woman had not reached her end. She had just reached the place where her true story would begin. Taza rode silently beneath the rising moon. The woman cradled in his arms, her head resting against his chest like a fragile bird too worn to fly. The rhythm of the horse's hooves matched the drumbeat in his mind, steady, deliberate, alert. He had seen death on the prairie before, but this time he had chosen not to turn away. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from or why she had been left behind. But the moment he found her, half buried in dust, something within him shifted. The settlers had abandoned her to the wolves and sun. She was white, yes, but her people had given her no loyalty. She was alone now, like him. The canyon came into view at dawn. Hidden between two ridges, the place was known only to a handful of his people warriors who scouted in secret or hunted away from prying eyes. A small spring trickled through the rocks, feeding a grove of juniper and scrub oak. Taza dismounted, carrying the woman carefully to a patch of shaded grass near a fire ring built long ago. He laid her gently on a buffalo robe, propped her ankle with soft moss, and began gathering herbs from a nearby crevice. His grandmother had taught him the plants, how to draw out fever with wild willow, how to ease pain with prickly poppy. Her voice whispered in his mind now as he ground roots and boiled water in a clay pot beside the fire. The woman groaned softly, her brow damp with sweat. Fever was coming. He dipped a cloth into the cooled mixture and laid it on her head. She flinched. He murmured low in Apache, a lullaby his mother used to sing. His voice was gravel-soft, barely above the wind. But it steadied her breathing when her eyes finally fluttered open. She looked at him, not with fear this time, but confusion. "You Apache?" She rasped. He nodded slowly. "Taza," her voice cracked. "Clara." Taza repeated it gently. "Clara." She smiled weakly. That was the beginning. Over the next 3 days, Taza rarely left her side. He hunted small game in the early mornings, cleaned her wound, and kept her fed with warm broth made from rabbit and wild onions. He didn't ask where her people were. He didn't need to. The truth sat in her silences, in the way her gaze turned. Distant whenever she looked eastward. Clara spoke little, her voice still hoarse from dehydration and grief. But she watched him closely, studying his movements, his careful hands. He never treated her roughly, never shouted. Where the men on the wagon train barked orders and dismissed her ideas, Taza listened when she spoke, even if he didn't always understand. One evening, she finally asked, "Why didn't you leave me too?" Taza sat by the fire, sharpening a stone blade. He paused. After a moment, he looked at her and said, "You were breathing." She blinked. "No spirit should be. Left for the coyotes," he added. "Even if she wears settler skin." Clara nodded slowly, eyes burning. The words struck something deep. She had spent her life trying to prove her worth, working harder than the other women, being quieter, gentler, easier to love. Still, when the moment came, they had chosen to let her die. Taza had not. He handed her a carved wooden cup filled with warm tea. Their hands brushed. The contact startled her, but not unpleasantly. "There are others like you?" she asked. Taza glanced at the canyon walls. "No," he said simply. "Not here." "Then why bring me?" His jaw clenched, but only briefly. "I do not know yet," he replied. But it felt wrong to ride away. They sat in silence. For a while, firelight dancing on their faces. A lone coyote howled in the distance. Clara closed her eyes, not from fear, but from peace. For the first time in days, maybe even weeks, she felt safe. Taza watched her fall asleep, her breathing even now, her fever broken. She was healing, but inside him, something else had begun to stir. It wasn't just duty anymore. He had carried her from death, but he didn't want to just return her to the world that threw her away. He didn't yet know if she would stay. He only knew he wanted her to, and for a man who had lost nearly everything, his brother to war, his love to soldiers, his home to treaties, this feeling was dangerous, but it was also something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The days stretched long and golden in the hidden canyon, and Clara found herself caught between two worlds, one that had abandoned her, and another that had saved her. She woke each morning to birdsong and the gentle smell of juniper smoke. Her pain had lessened, and though she still limped, her body was healing. But it was her spirit that felt most changed. The fear that once gripped her chest with icy fingers was now dull and distant, like a memory fading too slowly. Taza was always nearby, not hovering but present like the canyon walls themselves. Quiet, solid, watchful. Clara had expected to feel like a prisoner. She was alone with an Apache man she barely knew, far from anything familiar, with no way to contact the wagon train or find her old life. But strangely, she didn't feel trapped. She felt seen. Taza had made her a walking stick from a twisted cedar branch. He didn't say much when he gave it to her, just handed it over with a quiet nod, but his actions always spoke louder than words. He showed her how to find wild onions and acorns, how to spot animal tracks, and how to filter water through charcoal-packed reeds. When she tried to thank him, he waved it off with a small smile. "You have hands," he said simply. "You should know how to live." Clara had never been treated that way before, not by a man, not even by Thomas. Thomas had talked over her, brushed aside her ideas, told her she was soft and lucky to have a man with a plan. Yet that same man had left her in the dirt like a broken wagon wheel when things got hard. Taza never said those things. He never needed to. In his world, strength was not something worn loudly. It was quiet, steady, shared. One afternoon, Clara asked him, "Do you think they'll come looking for me?" He paused before answering. "Settlers? No." Her stomach sank, but she already knew it. The question was just hope wearing a mask. "I'm not worth much," she muttered. Taza turned his head toward her. "You are alive," he said simply. "That is worth everything." She looked down at her hands. "You don't even know me." "I know you did not die," he said. "I know you did not beg. You did not scream. You drank the water. You walked. Even when it hurt. These are things I know," she swallowed. "What do your people think about you keeping a settler woman in a canyon?" He gave a short laugh. "They think many things." "Will they come here?" "No," he said. "They no, I do not bring strangers unless it is for war, or something I believe in." Clara met his gaze. "Which am I?" Taza didn't answer. He just held her stare, and for a brief second, she felt her heartbeat flutter like a hummingbird trapped behind her ribs. As days turned to weeks, Clara found herself speaking more, even laughing, especially when Taza showed her how to climb the low canyon walls, or when she tried to mimic Apache words and butchered them completely. He'd raise an eyebrow at her pronunciation, then repeat the words slowly, his voice a deep rumble of patience. One evening, as they sat by the fire eating roast quail, Clara asked, "What did you do before you found me?" He stared into the flames for a moment. "I scouted. I watched your people move through our lands. I carried messages. Sometimes I hunted. Sometimes I fought. And now? I heal," he said softly, glancing at her. She didn't know how to reply, but despite the peace between them, a quiet tension stirred beneath it all. Clara still didn't know what came next. Was this just a place of recovery? A moment between chapters? Or was it the beginning of something else? Some nights, she lay awake, staring up at the stars, wondering what her old life had been worth. The people she'd followed west had never truly known her. The man who had claimed to love her had abandoned her without hesitation. And yet here she was cared for, protected, taught, even respected by someone her people would have called a savage. She now knew the savagery had never lived in Taza. It had lived in the way the settlers used people, discarded them, judged them without ever knowing their stories. And so Clara remained in the canyon, not because she was trapped, but because, for the first time in her life, she was learning who she really was, without fear, without expectations. And without needing to apologize for simply surviving, she was still between two worlds. But now, for the first time, she didn't feel like she belonged to either. She was something new, something forming, and deep down she could feel it. When the time came to choose, she wouldn't return to the world that left her to die. She would choose the one that helped her live. Clara had never lived slowly before. Her settler life had been full of noise and pressure chores from dawn to dusk, expectations from men who measured her worth by how much she could cook, clean, or remain silent. But here, in the canyon with Taza, the days moved like river water, steady, quiet, and full of meaning. She woke to the whisper of wind weaving through tall grass. Sometimes she saw deer on the ridge, frozen in dawnlight. And sometimes, when she rose early enough, she found Taza already standing in the shallows of the stream, bare-chested and still as a stone, offering quiet thanks to the rising sun. He didn't explain his rituals. He didn't need to. She was learning by watching, just as he had learned her moods without asking. She had stopped expecting cruelty from him. He had never laid a hand on her in anger, never mocked her for needing to rest. When she stumbled, he waited. When she wept, he didn't fill the silence with words. He simply sat near, as if to say, "You are not alone." Not anymore. Clara's hands were no longer soft. They were blistered from grinding corn against stone, stained from picking berries, scratched from climbing rock. She was sunburnt, freckled, sore, and stronger than she'd ever been. She even began speaking a few Apache words, surprising Taza one morning by calling the river T and the sun Shah. He raised an eyebrow. "You listen when I talk to the horse?" She smiled. "The horse speaks more kindly than most men I've known," he chuckled. "Then you knew the wrong men." Clara didn't reply. She didn't have to. He already knew. One evening, as they sat beside the fire with roasted fish on flat stones between them, Clara asked the question that had been growing inside her. "Why haven't you taken me back to the towns?" Taza glanced up at the stars, thinking, "Would you go?" "I don't know. Your people fear mine. And mine some would not understand me helping you. I'm not sure I belong with either." He turned to her, eyes dark and deep. "Then maybe you belong with yourself now, no one else." Clara stared into the flames. Those words settled in her chest like warmth. She had spent so long being defined by others, by her family, her fiancé, the wagon train, the expectations of womanhood and obedience. But here, she was shaping herself with her own hands, her own choices, and when she looked at Taza, something inside her shifted. He wasn't a rescuer, and she wasn't his possession. They were equals now, two souls who had seen the worst in people and still chose to offer kindness. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She wandered up the rocky slope behind their camp, wrapped in a woven blanket. The moonlight painted everything silver, and the canyon below looked like a secret world that didn't belong to time. She heard footsteps behind her. Taza. He stood beside her quietly, hands behind his back. "You climb well now," he said. "I've learned a lot lately." she said, turning to him. And not just about climbing, he nodded. So have I. She looked at him, this man who had offered her water when no one else would, who taught her to survive but never tried to own her. He had saved her life but never once reminded her of it, never made her feel small for needing help. Why did you really take me in? She asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Then, without looking away, he said, I once lost someone. A woman from my tribe. Soldiers took her. I couldn't save her. When I found you on the ground, something inside me said, not again. Clara's. Breath caught. I thought I was saving a life, he added, but maybe. I was trying to save myself, too. Clara reached out, her hand finding his dot. No more words were needed. Dot in that quiet canyon. Under a sky bursting with stars, a woman once left for dead and a man once left behind found something rare, not just survival, but purpose, peace, a reason to rise with the sun and greet the wind. And while they still lived between two worlds, hers and his, they had created a third, one built not on blood, land, or fear, but on trust and mutual healing. Clara. It was the first time she truly felt alive. The rains came suddenly. A heavy monsoon rolled in over the horizon, swallowing the dry skies with thick gray clouds and thunder that echoed like cannon fire through the cliffs. Clara and Taza moved quickly, covering what they could, sheltering supplies beneath rocks and securing the mule farther up the slope. As the storm settled in, they huddled beneath the rocky overhang near the fire pit. The rain beat against the ground like drumming hooves, steady and fierce. Clara watched the flames dance in the low light. I used to love storms when I was a girl, she said quietly. Mama would let me sit by the window wrapped in quilts and drink sassafras tea. Taza nodded, his eyes fixed on the fire. Storms wash away old spirits. They wake the land. Clara. Like that. She imagined the rain was cleansing her too, washing away the memory of those who left her behind. But just as she thought the storm brought only peace, something cracked deep within her. A sound. A face. A ghost from the past. She saw Thomas, her former fiancé, standing on the wagon trail, holding the reins of his horse as others argued about leaving her. His arms crossed. His face hard, cold. He's already gone, she whispered. But sometimes I still hear him in my mind. Taza looked at her, saying nothing. He was charming, you know. Told me I was the only woman with sense. Said he'd build us a future, that we'd have a home, a family. I believed him. Her voice caught. When the bandits attacked and I fell, I kept thinking he'd come back for me. She shook her head. He didn't even look back. Taza's jaw tensed. Cowards wear pride like a mask. Clara glanced at him. Did you ever love someone? For the first time, Taza looked away from the fire. His fingers clenched around a carved stick he'd been whittling. Yes, he didn't speak for a long moment, but when he did, his voice was like the thunder low and weighted with memory. Her name was Nayeli. She was a weaver from the mountain villages. Brave, stubborn, laughed even when her hands were bleeding from cactus thorns. Clara listened, heart tightening. One summer, soldiers raided near our camp. Said we were trespassing on land our people walked before their grandfathers were born. They took her with others. Claimed it was protective custody. I followed. For days, he paused. The fire popped. I found her bracelet outside a fort. Nothing else. I'm so sorry, Clara whispered. Taza finally met her eyes. That's why I carried you. Why I stayed. I didn't want to lose another soul to silence. The rain softened outside, mist drifting like breath across the canyon. Clara felt tears hot against her cheeks. Not just for herself or for Taza, but for all the lives caught between broken promises and land that belonged to no one and everyone. They sat close, the air between them heavy with old wounds. But something else lingered to recognition. They both had been hurt by people they trusted. Both had nearly vanished beneath grief. And yet here they were, alive, healing, together. Later that evening, the rain slowed to a hush. Clara stepped outside into the damp air. The earth smelled sweet and wild. Her bare feet pressed into soft, soaked dirt as she turned her face upward, letting the cool drops kiss her skin. Taza followed, silent as always, and watched her. She turned to him, her voice steady now. "I don't want to be afraid of ghosts. Anymore, not his. Not mine? I want to live forward, not backward." Taza nodded once. "You already are." That night, Clara didn't dream of Thomas, or of the wagon train, or of the woman who'd been left in the dust. She dreamed of weaving, of rivers, of strong hands guiding her through tall grass. She dreamed of freedom, not in running, but in choosing to stay, to grow, to love again. The past would always echo, but now it had somewhere to go, somewhere to be softened by time and rain, and the steady hands of someone who had once lost everything and now had something to protect. The storm left behind a world that felt cleaner, but not calmer. The morning air was cool, and the canyon buzzed with new life, birds shaking water from their wings, insects crawling from soaked crevices. But Clara sensed it before Taza even said a word. Something had changed. She found him crouched near the ridge where the canyon widened into prairie. His posture was stiff, alert. His eyes scanned the distance, hawk-sharp. "What is it?" she asked. "Riders," he murmured. "3, maybe 4. Clara's stomach dropped. "Apache? No." He stood slowly, jaw tightening. "Settlers. One has a blue coat. Soldier." Clara backed away from the ledge. "They're looking for me." Taza said nothing at first, but the look in his eyes was unreadable, part tension, part something deeper. "Something wounded. Do you want them to find you?" he asked quietly. The question struck her harder than she expected. For weeks, she had longed for rescue, any sign that someone remembered her, cared enough to come. But now that they were here, her chest tightened with dread. "I don't know," she whispered. "It might be safer with them." "For who?" She looked up sharply. "Safer for you," he added. "Or for them," Clara swallowed. "They're my people. They left you behind." She didn't answer. The words sat between them, heavy with truth. Taza moved quickly. He packed what he could, buried what he couldn't, and led Clara to a narrow cut in the rocks, almost invisible from the trail above. There they waited, watching the upper ridge. His bow lay across his lap. Not drawn but close, Clara watched. Him with rising unease. "What will you do if they find us?" "I will not hurt them," he said flatly. "Not unless they force my hand." "Promise me," she said. His gaze turned to her. "Do you trust them more than me?" "No," she said instantly. "But I know what they'll think. If they see me with you, they will not see you." The riders came by midday. Clara recognized the one in front immediately, Thomas. He wore a dark trail coat and a rifle strapped to his saddle. His face looked thinner, more weathered, but just as cold. 2 other men flanked him, one older, one in a cavalry jacket. None of them looked concerned. They looked determined, watchful. As they dismounted near the canyon's edge, Clara tensed. "They're tracking," Taza whispered. Thomas knelt near a flattened patch of grass and rubbed his fingers through the dirt. "She was here," he said to the others. "Told you I saw smoke from this direction 2 nights back." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "They think I'm in danger," she whispered. "They don't know what danger is," Taza replied. The men moved deeper into the canyon trail, weapons slung low but ready. One called out, "Clara, if you're here, call out." Her heart pounded. Taza didn't speak. He was watching her, not the men. Waiting. Clara's voice trembled. "If I don't go, They'll think you've taken me. They already do. I don't want you hurt. Then speak, he said calmly. But choose carefully. Clara stepped halfway out of the rocks, heart thudding in her ears. Thomas. She called. Her voice cracked. I'm here. The men froze. Thomas spun, spotting her instantly. Clara. Thank God. We thought you were dead. I was close, she said flatly. The other men started toward her. Thomas was already moving. Taza stepped into view behind her, and all hell broke loose. Get away from her! The soldier shouted, drawing his pistol. No! Clara stepped in front of Taza, arms wide. Stop, Thomas halted. Confusion, then anger, twisted across his face. What the hell's going on? Did he take you? No, he saved me. Thomas looked her over her buckskin dress, the beads around her neck, the fire in her eyes. It was the same woman, but not. The same woman. You need to come with us, he said sternly. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. Clara, he's an Apache. He's also the reason I'm alive. Silence fell like a guillotine. Thomas's jaw tightened. You're not thinking straight. Actually, she said quietly, I've never thought more clearly. Behind her, Taza hadn't moved. He was still and calm, but Clara felt the tension rolling off him like heat. The soldier muttered, We need to get her out of here. This ain't right. Thomas stepped closer. Clara, this is your last chance. She stared at him, the man, who had once held her hand and left it to rot in the dirt. No, she said, voice steady. This is yours. She turned away, walked back to Taza, and didn't look back. The canyon held its breath. Clara stood beside Taza, heart pounding like the hooves of stampeding horses, while the men she once trusted stared at her like she'd lost her mind or worse, betrayed them. Thomas's expression shifted from disbelief to wounded pride. You're not staying here, he barked. You don't belong with him, Clara straightened. And where exactly do I belong, Thomas? With the people who left me to die in the dirt? You were injured. We couldn't, he stammered, but the excuse dissolved before it reached her. You had a choice, she said quietly, and you made it. The soldier whispered something to Thomas, likely about taking her by force. But even the younger man seemed uncertain now, watching how Clara stood so firmly beside the Apache warrior. Unafraid. Taza hadn't said a word, but his stillness radiated strength. Not the kind bred from violence, but the kind born from conviction. His bow rested at his side, untouched. He was ready to protect, but not provoke. Let's go, the soldier urged, glancing around. We don't want trouble, but Thomas didn't move. He stepped forward, eyes pleading now. Clara, come back, come home. She shook her head slowly. That place was never home. You were never what I thought, her voice softened. And maybe I wasn't what you thought either. They left. Eventually, the men turned their horses around and rode back down the canyon path, their retreating figures shrinking against the rising sun. Thomas didn't look back. Clara didn't cry. She felt no ache for what was lost, because nothing real had been taken from her. What hurt was knowing she had once fought, so hard to be accepted by people who'd never truly seen her. That night, Clara sat by the fire, quiet and thoughtful. She didn't speak much, didn't need to. But when Taza handed her a bundle of rabbit stew and sat beside her, their shoulders close, she finally whispered, You gave me the space to choose. Not many men do that. Taza stirred the embers with a stick. You already had the strength. You only needed time to see it. I didn't know what I was choosing until I heard his voice again. It was like I stepped out of a dream and finally saw what I'd escaped. You chose yourself, Taza said. Clara nodded, then looked at him. And maybe I chose you too. Over the next few days, the rhythm of life in the canyon returned. The winds carried no more voices, no more search parties. It was as if the world outside had let go of Clara Whitmore completely, and yet she didn't feel lost. She hunted beside Taza, laughed when she startled a wild turkey from the brush, washed her clothes in the stream and sang softly to herself old songs from her childhood songs she'd once whispered just to feel less alone. But the world was no longer empty. There were moments now when Taza would brush his fingers along her wrist or braid strands of her hair with beads, his hands gentle, sure. He was still quiet, still guarded, but the walls between them had thinned. One morning, as the sun stretched golden light across the canyon, Clara stood beside him on the ridge, looking east. "Do you think they'll try to come back?" she asked. Taza shook his head. "Not for you." The words might have sounded cruel, but not from him. From him, they felt like freedom. "Then this is where I'll stay," she said. He glanced at her, brows low. "Are you certain?" She looked down the canyon at the shelter she'd helped rebuild, the fire ring they shared, the trail she had learned to walk with pride. "Yes," she said. "Not because I'm hiding, but because I found something worth staying for." Later that evening, Taza brought her a wrap bundle made of deerskin. Inside, nestled on a soft bed of pine needles, was a simple necklace made from small turquoise stones and a carved wooden pendant in the shape of a hawk. "My mother's," he said. It was her sign. The hawk watches, protects, flies above. Clara touched it gently, then looked up at him. "Why give this to me?" He hesitated, then answered in a voice barely above the fire's crackle. "Because I see you now, not as someone I saved, but someone I choose." Clara placed the necklace around her neck, its weight warm and right. She smiled, leaning into him as he pulled her gently into his arms. The decision had been made, and for the first time in her life, it had been hers alone. The days that followed Clara's decision were her most peaceful yet. She woke to birdsong, her body stronger than ever, and her heart no longer torn by doubt. She walked beside Taza each morning, helped tend the small garden he had cultivated in a narrow patch of shade, and listened to him teach her Apache words, laughing when she got the intonations wrong. But peace, Clara was learning, never stayed. Long in the west. It was early afternoon when she wandered down to the stream alone, a woven basket looped over her arm. She wanted to collect wild mint and watercress for their evening meal, and Taza had ridden out just an hour before to check a trail deeper in the hills. She felt safe, safe enough to sing softly to herself as she knelt by the water, her reflection rippling beside reeds and polished stones. Her hands plunged into the cold stream, collecting the sweet, sharp-scented mint, when a voice behind her cut the air like a whip. "There she is." Clara froze. Two men stepped out from the underbrush. Not soldiers, not Apaches. Settlers. Her breath caught. One wore a faded tan vest and carried a rifle. The other, a wiry man with red hair and a crooked grin, had a rope coiled in his hand. "Clara Whitmore?" the red-haired one said. "Well, hell, thought we'd never find you again." She stood slowly, every nerve in her body prickling. "What do you want?" "Your fiancé's been looking for you," the other man said. "He hired us to make sure you came back, whether you wanted to or not." She stepped back. "I'm not going anywhere." The red-haired man grinned wider. "That's the thing, miss. You don't get a say." She ran. Not toward the camp, toward the trees, but her injured ankle, long-healed but still weaker than before, betrayed her on the loose slope. She fell hard, the mint basket spilling, her breath knocked from her chest. They were on her in seconds. She kicked, screamed, bit one of their hands. But the rope went around her wrist before she could rise, and the other man slammed her against the base of a tree. His weight cruel and careless. "You got wild," he muttered. "Apache'll do that to a woman." They tied her hands and hauled her onto one of their horses. Her lip was bleeding, one of her sleeves torn. She shook with rage. Not fear. She was no longer the woman they thought she was. Taza returned just before dusk. He saw the overturned basket, the mint scattered, a footprint he didn't recognize. 2 horses. 2 sets of tracks leading north. His heart thundered in his chest. He didn't shout, didn't panic. He packed lightly, took his fastest horse, and rode in silence, his eyes never leaving the faint indentations on the trail. He rode until stars dusted the sky, until the wind whispered something sharp and ancient into his ears. They had taken what they should never have touched. And they would answer for it. Meanwhile, the 2 men made camp just beyond a wooded ridge, tying Clara to a tree like she was a criminal. "You'll thank us later," one muttered as he chewed jerky beside the fire. "Man like Thomas, he's got land now. Sawed he'd marry you proper. Can't let a good woman throw herself to savages." Clara said nothing. She'd already stopped wasting words on men like them. Inside, she was stone, cold, focused, and she wasn't afraid. Not really, because she knew Taza would come. Not out of ownership, not out of pride, but out of love. Because what they had was more than survival. It was sacred. She didn't sleep. Neither did they. And just before dawn, when the fire had burned down to coals and one of the men dozed off, a soft noise stirred the edge of the trees. A breath. A shadow. Then, like a phantom, Taza stepped from the darkness. He moved like the wind, like the wind, silent, swift. Before the man with the rifle could raise it, Taza's bow was drawn. A shaft of carved wood hit the ground beside his foot, a warning. "Let her go," Taza said low. The red-haired man scrambled up. "Now hold on." Another arrow struck the tree beside his shoulder. Clara shouted, "Taza, don't kill them." He didn't. He could have. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped forward, eyes locked with the men who dared touch what was not theirs. Not a possession, but a human life. "She chose," Taza said. The men, unsure whether he had more arrows or help watching from the trees, dropped their weapons. They didn't run until Taza cut Clara free and took her hand. And even then, they ran like the devil himself was behind them. Clara collapsed into his arms, and for the first time in weeks, she let the tears fall. Not from fear, but from fury, from gratitude, from relief. "You came," she whispered. "I will always come." He answered. And in that moment, beneath the pale gold of early morning light, Clara realized something uncheckable. She hadn't just chosen a man. She had chosen a life, and that life would never let her be taken again. The morning after her rescue, Clara sat by the stream, her wrist still raw from the rope, her reflection trembling in the water. Her lip was cut, her ribs ached. But the pain was distant compared to what boiled inside her. They had tried to take her again. To pull her back into a world where men decided her fate, where her voice was an afterthought and her body something to barter. She looked up when she heard Taza's footsteps behind her. He carried a clay bowl of crushed yarrow and honey, something he'd made without asking, something to soothe her bruises. Clara blinked back, the sting in her eyes. "You didn't have to come for me." Taza knelt beside her. "I always knew they would come, and I always hoped they wouldn't," she whispered. He dipped his fingers into the bowl and gently applied the salve to her wrists. She winced, but not from the sting. "I thought I was done being claimed," she said bitterly. "You are," he said softly. Her eyes lifted to his. "But you came for me." He held her gaze. "Because I love you." The words landed like a steady beat in her chest, unexpected, yet entirely right. "I don't want to belong to anyone," she said, voice shaking. "Not ever again." "You don't," he answered. "You stand beside me, not behind." That was the difference. The kind she had never believed could exist. The next few days were quiet. Clara rested, her body recovering quickly, but her heart more slowly. Taza gave her space, never pressing her for more than she was ready to give. He taught her how to notch arrows and fletch feathers, how to snare small birds and recognize edible roots by scent alone. These things didn't just pass the time, they returned her power, made her feel sharp again, and he never once spoke again of love. He had said what he needed to say. And now he let her decide what came next. On the fourth day, Clara stood beneath. The stars in the canyon clearing, the air cool against her skin, a fire glowing low behind her. Taza sat on the edge of the ledge, sharpening a knife against stone. The sound rhythmic and calming. Clara approached slowly, her bare feet quiet against the earth. "Taza?" He turned, not surprised, but expectant. She held something in her hands, his mother's hawk necklace. "I haven't taken it off," she said softly. "Even when they grabbed me," he nodded. "I kept thinking, if they hurt me, this would remind me I wasn't theirs, that I had a life beyond them, a life here." He rose. "I'm not ready to be anyone's wife," she said. "Not in the settler's way, not in the church's way, not yet." "I do not ask for that," he said gently. "But I want to stay," she continued. "To be with you, to learn, to build something that doesn't belong to the past. I want something honest, and I want it with you." Taza didn't answer with words. He stepped forward and pressed his forehead gently to hers in Apache gesture of trust, of kinship, of shared spirit. Clara closed her eyes and breathed him in the smoke, the pine, the quiet strength. "I love you too," she whispered. That night, they lay beside the fire, not as rescuer and rescued, not as settler and Apache, but as two hearts beaten by the world, daring to start again. Taza didn't rush her, didn't ask more than she gave. His hand found hers beneath the blanket. She let it stay. The world outside their canyon still churned with war and resentment, with laws drawn by strangers and treaties broken in smoke-filled rooms. But here, in this sliver of wild land untouched by hate, a warrior had found a woman once abandoned and loved her not because she was broken, but because she had put herself back together with her own hands, and she had chosen him not out of desperation, but out of clarity, out of freedom, out of love. Autumn came slowly to the canyon. The leaves shifted from green to gold, the mornings grew cooler, and a soft hush fell over the land as if the earth itself was preparing to rest. Clara had never known a season could feel like a promise, but that's what this one became, a promise of roots, of belonging, of peace not won by war, but by choosing it every day. She woke each morning beside Taza, their shelter warm and solid, the smoke from their fire curling into the chill. There was no wedding band on her hand, no priest's blessing, no witnesses, yet she felt more married in spirit than she ever would have with the man who left her for dead. Here, marriage wasn't a transaction. It was built of effort. It was mending clothes side by side, hunting together in silence, laughing when she tripped over her own snare line. It was trust. Taza carved a new home with his bare hands, not large, not extravagant. A single-room lodge, nestled deeper in the canyon wall, half covered by natural rock and brush. The roof was woven with pine boughs, earth-packed, with a smoke hole at the top. Clara gathered stones for the hearth and stitched buffalo hide into soft rugs. At night, they laid beneath firs, her head on his chest, his stories of the old days drifting into her dreams. "You made all this for me?" she once asked, touching the smooth wood of the door frame. "I made it for us," he replied. "You were never mine. But this place, this is ours." Occasionally, distant riders passed along the high ridge trails, traders, scouts, settlers. But no one entered the canyon. No one dared. Clara had stopped thinking about Thomas. If he still lived, he had surely told himself a lie about what happened, that she was taken, that she'd been turned, that she was too lost to save. But Clara no longer cared about their stories. She was too busy writing her own. One afternoon, she sat beside the fire sewing a deerskin pouch when Taza returned with a small bundle tucked in his arms. Inside it, a wounded fawn, its leg bent unnaturally. It wandered into a snare, he said, gently placing it down. Clara's hands moved carefully, instinctively. She splinted the leg with twigs and tied it in place with soft cord, whispering calming sounds as she worked. Taza watched her, not just with admiration, but with quiet awe. "You are not the woman I found that day," he said. Clara smiled, not looking up. "No, she died out there. And this one?" he asked. "This one was born in your canyon," she said. Later that night, as stars gathered in the black velvet sky and coyotes howled far off on the plains, Clara stood at the edge of the canyon and looked east toward the world she'd come from. She didn't feel sorrow. She didn't feel fear. She felt still. Taza came to stand beside her, his blanket draped around both their shoulders. He pointed to the horizon where the moonlight struck a faraway bluff. "One day, others may come. The land may change. The world may forget us." Clara turned to him. "Then let the world forget." He smiled faintly. "But we will not." They didn't need fences or documents. They didn't need pews or prayers or names on a ledger. What they had was something older than all of that. It was a home carved into canyon stone. It was meals shared beneath stars. It was two hearts, once discarded by the world, now beating together in the wild. Years later, travelers told stories of a white woman who lived in the canyon with an Apache warrior. Some said she'd been kidnapped. Some said she was a witch. Others swore she was just a ghost of the frontier. But the truth was this: she had been left for dead, and she had chosen, with full heart and open eyes, to never go back.